Warning, this video contains spoilers for both EarthBound and EarthBound Beginnings. If you have not played and beaten either game yet, I strongly suggest you do so before watching this video. I will now make my great getaway in my Rufflecopter.
EarthBound's better than EarthBound Beginnings. Deal with it! Hey, what's up guys? I'm RoberOnocle and welcome to why I prefer EarthBound to EarthBound Beginnings. So anyway, to me, EarthBound is a good yet underrated game. I really like everything about it, from the visuals to the soundtrack. It's all done really well. When I found out that its prequel had came out, I knew I just had to try it. And by the way, yes, I'm going to call this game a prequel because I want to. However, to me, this game was nowhere near as good as EarthBound was, and I'm going to tell you why I feel that way. Also, please don't think that just because I like EarthBound, it means that those who like Beginnings aren't welcome with their opinion. You will not be judged for liking that game. In fact, I'd be more than glad to see why those of you who like the game more than EarthBound have your reasons as of why you do. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. EarthBound is a science fiction RPG about a boy named Ness who sets on an adventure to stop an alien race from ruling the entire universe. Then we have EarthBound Beginnings. That serves as the game that takes place before EarthBound, hence the name. EarthBound Beginnings is also a science fiction story about a boy named Ninten, an asthmatic who sets on a journey that's not exactly made clear to him nor his friends until halfway through the game. So that's the brief watered down version of both games' stories. Now to get to the real topic at hand, which game is better, and what we're going to do is look at what both games have to offer in content. Keep in mind that the reasonings will be more within my favor. As stated earlier, I prefer EarthBound and EarthBound Beginnings. These reasons are also from my personal experiences and a few other fellow EarthBound players too, so keep that in mind too. So now that we've got that down, let's take a look at our first topic at hand, gameplay. EarthBound Beginnings takes on the gameplay that of your typical NES RPG. The game starts you off with little gear, and that gear is also very inferior to the qualities that of your enemies at the time. The game also has a random enemy encounter system that, in my personal opinion, has an encounter rate that's far too high. It seems that for every few steps I take, I run into an enemy. And there's even been times where I've literally taken a step after battle just to run straight into another one, and this has happened to me more times than I can count. Now let's look at EarthBound for a second, where it has removed the random enemy encounter system and now replaced it with spawn enemies that roam the world, and depending on where you are at the time is how the spawn rates are affected, resulting from one lone enemy to 5 or 6 on screen at a time. On top of that, EarthBound adds a cooldown system that, after a battle is over, you have about 4 seconds until enemies notice you and they'll attack you again. To me, this is far more balanced than Beginnings, but trust me, if EarthBound had an absurd amount of enemies on screen at a time, it would be no better than Beginnings, as it would be really hard to avoid enemies, especially ones that can teleport towards you in the overworld. But let's get back to Beginnings. Beginnings is also very notorious for being very unrewarding, as the game provides very little EXP and money for defeating enemies. This would result in several players having to grind for several hours. I'm not joking, I wish I was making this up. There are even enemies that are literally designed just for grinding so you can become powerful enough to beat them. These enemies tend to be far stronger, faster, and have an absurdly high amount of defense. I'm usually the kind of guy that doesn't mind a little grinding here and there, but this constantly forced gameplay aspect comes down to being downright boring after a while. Anyway, EarthBound had the really neat, but not completely necessary, feature to the health system where the health would roll down instead of being instantaneous. In other words, you wouldn't die right away, but you had to either act quickly to end the battle or undo the damage altogether. If you still don't get it, let me give you an example. If you had 100 HP, and an enemy hit you with an attack that dealt 200 HP, your health would basically tick down. Then you would have to kill that enemy before the time runs out, and then you wouldn't die, then the battle would be over. See what I'm saying? EarthBound Beginnings' health system was instantaneous, but that doesn't really matter. However, the rolling health system can really turn the tides of battle though, so score 2 for EarthBound. Now we're going to look at presentation. EarthBound Beginnings explains why the games and its future games are even happening in the first place, and EarthBound doesn't explain any backstory because Beginnings already did that, and instead has a neat little cinematic intro and does some following scenes before the actual game starts. I'm going to have to call a draw here, as both games do their jobs really well when both games start. No complaints here. Let's get something straight. It's going to be hard to enjoy a game if its design is very specific in such a way where not providing enough information will get you lost. While EarthBound gives you enough information of where to go next, excluding that horrible place called Moonside, it doesn't hold your hand with it, which is good. Beginnings, however, falls flat on his face really hard with this one. There has been several times where I had no idea where to go next, and I ended up having to resort to a walkthrough several times because I was just that lost in the game. The only time I had to look up a walkthrough in EarthBound was when I had to go to Moonside, because that place gives you like zero information on where to go next. To give you an example of Beginnings' bad information provision, when you go to rescue a girl named Pippi from the graveyard, you have to go speak with her, and answer her questions in such a way where she gives you the Franklin badge, an item you absolutely need to fight a boss later on. But the game doesn't even tell you to visit Pippi as a hint to get the badge. Really? You need to talk to a girl who has a badge that can deflect laser beams. But 1, why would you think that a little girl has that kind of item? And 2, most people are likely going to ignore her after you save her because she goes back to being an NPC. See, this game just runs under a lot of assumptions, and that's just annoying. Now, admittedly, the game does tell you where to go sometimes, but then after the first half of the game is done, you literally get roughly 2 more directories, and that's it. You figure it out from there. This falls into my next problem. This is like information provision, but instead of being told what to do next, you just need to know how not to get lost and confused about where you are. EarthBound has several locations that all have iconic looks and themes to them, so you can get a good idea of where you are. Beginnings is the complete opposite. Every location looks too similar to each other, with the exception of Snowman, Magicant, Yucca Desert, and Youngtown, only because of the trees there though. Don't believe me? Do a little experiment. Go to either Podunk, Reindeer, Marysville, Spokane, or LA, and find the most empty spot in one of the towns. Then get a friend who has also beaten the game. Ask them where you are. They're likely going to guess wrong, and if they're right, they either know the game back to front or they just blindly guessed, and I'm going to have to go with the latter here. This is not to say that every location looks the same, as some clearly don't, but even then, the majority of the time, the same music plays, and the places in this game are so freaking ginormous that you're bound to get lost anyway. Now look at EarthBound. It isn't just one big map with a bunch of locations in it. It's more organized, has themes of different locations, and every place looks different. We're of course excluding houses, as they all do look really similar to each other. But come on, who's gonna get lost in a small old house? Let's be honest. First time playthroughs and beginnings are going to take forever, even if you did have a walkthrough. Gotta be honest here too, both games actually do a decent job of this, but in their own very different ways. Let's see why. In Beginnings, Ninten is a regular boy with asthma, puts others before him, and he also falls in love with Anna later on. Lloyd is a smart boy who always gets picked on at school, but one day he got a friend, and that friend is Ninten, who inspired him to become braver, despite having several people, even his family, not support him. Anna probably has the weakest of all personality developments. All she does is follow with Ninten really. That's it, nothing special. Teddy probably has the strongest of all personalities. He's a gang leader that's a little quick to get mad and will start a fight. However, he's willing to accept defeat, no hesitation. Though all he really wants to do is get revenge for his parents' deaths on Mount Etoy. Now we're going to look at EarthBound. Ness is a 13-year-old boy who loves baseball and loves his family very much, and can't imagine living without them. Paula Polestar is the 13-year-old girl who's very popular in the town. She works at the Polestar preschool with their parents. She later likely falls in love with Ness, as hinted at the end of the game. Jeff Andernuts is a boy with an "I'm a nerd and I'm proud" attitude, and he values education a lot. He's good with engineering and fixing things. Pooh, yeah, real funny name, is a martial arts and PSI trainee that values training a lot. He's also very popular in this country. Oh, by the way, we're close to having me shut up about this topic. Both Beginnings and EarthBound have very different vibes in both stories. Let me explain. Beginnings has the vibe of giving. Ninten gives a bottle rocket to Lloyd and becomes his friend. Ninten fights through danger to give Anna her hat back, though was that really worth it? Just saying. Ninten helps Teddy get some of his revenge for his parents' deaths, and Ninten finds the 8 melodies to restore Queen Mary's memories. Even though that was short, you see what I mean? Giving things to people to help them with their problems, big and small. This is where Ninten's put others before you part comes in. But then you have EarthBound's vibe, which is the vibe of sacrificing. Ness has to sacrifice his love of staying with his family. This can be seen when Ness becomes homesick, as he clearly doesn't want to go on this adventure and just wants to go home, and playing baseball to save the world. Paula also has to sacrifice her love of friends and family to save the world too. Jeff has to give up his friends and his treasured education and has to face the dangers of the world. I mean, this guy freaking fought forest animals to go help a voice he heard in his head. That's a sacrifice too. Not even knowing what you're doing sometimes, but you know it helps someone in the long run. Pooh sacrificed his training, but that kinda falls flat on his face a wee bit, as in one point in the game, Pooh needs to be taken away for even more training, even though he was said to be done. But then he returns again, though he does sacrifice his love of staying with his friends, but that's pretty much it. However, these sacrifices are nowhere near as good as the next thing I'm about to say. The biggest sacrifice of all is the 4 heroes' sacrifice of knowing fully well that there's a very high possibility that their souls may never return back to their bodies after battle, and they may live the rest of their lives miserable, but as long as everyone else is safe, they're satisfied. This is what sold me and made me love this game so much. The story got really deep there, and I was actually really concerned whether they were going to make it back or not from the Cave of the Past. I mean, seriously, I've never seen a finale so well done before. But as much as I want to go on about this, let's get started on wrapping things up here. To sum this all up, Beginnings came out with the story and characterization more explicitly, while EarthBound came out with the story and characterization more implicitly. And boy, does EarthBound have one heck of a story to tell when you bring all the pieces together. Along with all the other improvements talked about earlier, this is why I believe EarthBound is better than Beginnings. And this is also why EarthBound, I believe, is the best game I've ever played. Now let's look at EarthBound for a second, whereas remove the random enemy encounter system, and now replace it with spawn enemies that roam the world, and depending on where you're at the time is how the spawn rates are affected. Now let's look at EarthBound for a second, whereas remove the random These enemies tend to be far stronger, faster, and have an absurdly high amount of defense. I'm usually the kind of guy that doesn't mind a little grinding here and there, but this constantly forced gameplay aspect These enemies tend to be far stronger, faster, and have an absurdly high amount of defense. I'm usually the kind of guy that doesn't mind a little grinding here and there, but this constantly forced gameplay aspect comes down to being dying route. Jeff has to give up his friends and his treasured education, and has to face the dangers of the world. I mean, this guy freaking fought forest animals like a hub of voice. Jeff has to give up his friends and his treasured education, and has to face the dangers of the world. I mean, this guy freaking fought forest animals like a hub of... Why can't I say this right? Jeff has to give up his friends and his treasured education, and has to face the dangers of the world. I mean, this guy freaking fought forest animals like a hub of voice he heard in his head. That's a sacrifice too. Not even knowing what you've... So close. Yet so far.